Hello, welcome to Ladder Daily Digest. I'm Gene Judson, and today I'm visiting with Steve Pynakker of Mormon Book Reviews. Welcome to the program, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Gene. I really appreciate you inviting me onto our test run pilot episode that may never see the light of day.
That's right. The purpose of Ladder Daily Digest is to bring to the listeners and viewers more podcasts that are out there so that they can get a little review, meet the podcasters, and maybe decide to expand their worldview of Mormonism or other subjects even. So Steve, let our listeners know a little bit about your background.
Well, Gene, it's great to have met you last year for the first time when you showed up for one of my meetups, and then which was really cool. And many of you probably seen my story on Mormon stories and stuff like that. But basically, a little over 2 years ago, I decided I was going to start a channel called Mormon Book Reviews. And basically, I was going to review the books on my bookshelf, which, by the way, this is representative of the original bookshelf. That's pretty much was the extent of my collection. It has since expanded quite considerably, I might add. And most of those books that were sent to me were actually sent to me by publishers as well as authors, free of charge. And so I just was really interested in Mormonism when I was a little kid, and I thought about just doing a little channel where I would review the books in that bookshelf. And next thing you know, I get on the radar screen of John DeLynn and Sandra Tanner and Richard Bushman and John Hamer. And I mean, this is just within weeks of starting the channel. Don Bradley, of course, Rick Bennett was my very first guest on my channel. So I knew I was onto something special, because how in the world did I have this little tiny, imagine having this tiny little YouTube channel, and the Joe Rogan of Mormon podcasters is talking to you. Imagine starting a podcast and you have 10 subscribers and Joe Rogan's talking to you. That's kind of how it felt to be recognized that early on by people.
Right. So you were consuming podcasts and you had all your books.
Yep.
But what was it? Was it just a fad, a trend to do a podcast? And what was like the real impetus for starting?
Well, my father passed away in September of 2020, and I actually moved to Florida to kind of help take care of him for my mom and him. And it was right around the time that he passed away that I was starting to think of different ideas for doing a podcast, mostly YouTube channels. So I don't really listen to podcasts. I just watch my podcasts on YouTube. So I'm a YouTube guy, so I'm primarily a YouTube guy, although we're working on expanding, and we do have audio stuff, but we're a little behind in that regard. But so I just listen to YouTube channels all the time. And I just remember I would watch these different interviews and I'd be like, I think I can do this. I think I can do what these people are doing, because I see they're successful. They have the varying degrees of success. And I thought, I think I'm able to do this myself, because partly was I wanted to ask the follow-up questions to some of my favorite interviewers they'd have this great guest on, and the guest would give this really interesting answer. And then they wouldn't ask the follow-up question that I would ask. And I recall it was the John Hamer one. I don't even remember what the follow-up question was, but I just remember it was either Rick Bennett or John DeLynn. John Hamer gave this really fascinating answer, and then they didn't ask the follow-up question that I would have asked. So I thought, well, I need to ask that follow-up question.
Got to get John Hamer on my show.
Yeah, exactly.
What you thought.
And so that's kind of was the impetus, was thinking, I think I can do this. And this is the thing, I didn't know a single Mormon at the time. Not a single one.
That you knew about.
What's that?
I was going to say that you knew. Sometimes there are Mormons that are around you that you just don't know they're Mormon because.
Right. Well, that's true too. And I had interactions with Mormons in the past.
Right.
Like I worked at Borders, and one of the bishop's daughter worked at the bookstore, and I tried to engage her, and she was not interested in having conversations about Mormonism. You could tell she was embarrassed by it a little bit. So I never
knew of them, but not they weren't like close personal friends.
Yeah, I didn't know any. I didn't really know any interactions. I knew of them. And where I come from, just outside Chicago, there's a way more Jehovah's Witnesses and Hammond First Baptist people, which at the time had the world's largest Sunday school. Those people were going to knock on your door way before. Yeah, we used to have Jehovah's Witnesses knock on our door all the time. Never, ever had Mormons knock on our door. So I had very, very few interactions with them. But I was always interested in Mormonism since I was a young boy, like around 8 years old. So that really, for me, it was just like, I didn't really know what I knew. I didn't know because I didn't have anybody to talk to. But it was when I went to Mormon History Association in June of 2021. And I thought, okay, I'm finally going to find out what my blind spots are. Like, I'm going to find out what I don't know. And what was the biggest surprise for me, the biggest shock for me was, and I don't mean this in an arrogance way, because I understand scholars have they have their areas of expertise, right? So I'm not taking away anything from the scholars. But what was shocking to me was the amount of knowledge that I had, that I was telling BYU professors the history of their own church that they'd never heard before. And I was like, whoa, I don't have the blind spots. They do. Now, admittedly, I'm sure I have blind spots here and there, and I'm not going to be prideful. But it was just really interesting to me, the amount of people that know a whole lot about the history of their own church. That was really eye-opening for me. And so, and this is the thing, dude, and I think you were at one of my meetups that I had last year. And this woman comes up to me. She says, you don't know who I am, and don't tell anybody I'm here, but I'm Thomas Monson's niece. And I've learned so much about the history of my church by watching your program. So that really hit me like, whoa, that was really amazing to me. So yeah, dude, I mean, didn't know any Mormons, and just kind of decided, found this 19-year-old kid that lives at my Christian community, asked me, hey, you want to help me start a YouTube channel? And that's what we did.
Awesome. So I remember your first glimpse into Mormonism was a Book of Mormon with all the Arnold Freeberg
Right. Yep.
pictures and paintings in it.
Yeah.
And so what was your next Mormon book purchase, or what started it after the Book of Mormon? Do you remember?
Well, that's a great question. I think actually this is a pretty good one. This would have been about 20 plus years ago, called the New Mormon Challenge. It's written by Zondervan, and these are all Richard Mao wrote the forward, and these are some leading evangelical scholars who basically said, guys, these Mormon scholars, we can't use the old arguments anymore. These guys have done some really legitimate scholarship. So this would be I can't say how many Mormon books I would have had in my shelf at the time, but this would certainly been one of my first where I was really, and again, this was 20 plus years ago, but I was collecting books in the 90s. So I know I would have bought more books, but this would certainly be one of the early ones. And I read this thing probably like 2 or 3 times. I love this one. It's really good. I'm hoping to get the 2 of the 3 editors to come on my program to do kind of like a 20 plus year retrospective on this book.
I remember you mentioning that you started off by doing book reviews.
Yes.
And you would grab a book from your shelf and you'd talk about it and give your reviews.
Yep.
And then somehow you started interviewing people. Who was your first guest? And then how did you start to consider doing more interviews instead of book reviews?
Well, to answer the second part, people just weren't watching the book reviews. I would do all this work, especially the second season. We're doing 4K background, doing really all this stuff, and get 200, 300 views. And Anthony, he's when you're editing and uploading 4K videos, even though they're 5 to 7 minute longs, it's a lot of work. And we're putting all this work and effort into doing these book reviews, and nobody's watching them, relatively speaking, compared to the interviews. So the very first interview I did was with Rick Bennett. So that's the first time I ever interviewed anybody was with Rick. And then my second interview was with Dr. Christopher Thomas, who wrote the book Pentecostal Reads the Book of Mormon. And he's also the president of the Book of Mormon Studies Association. And then my third interview was Matt Harris. So, and partly I was able to get Matt Harris because he's such good friends with Rick Bennett. And so Matt was like, well, any friend of Rick's, I'll come on. So I had a great conversation. Now, both those interviews, they've only got a few hundred views, and I'd like to kind of re-edit them and release them because I think they're really important interviews. But then I'm in touch with Don Bradley. I'm in touch with John Hamer. And, it was interesting because Dr. Christopher Thomas told me, he said, Steve, and lesson learned real quick, he said, you got to understand something. You'll never run out of authors who will want to come on a program to talk about their book. So
I'm hoping the same thing happens with podcasters.
Yes, exactly. I think it will. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You won't have any trouble finding podcasters to come on your program because they'll like to talk about the programs. And I like this unique concept that you're doing, where you kind of do like an overview of different Mormon podcasters and say, hey, check it out, and I think that's a really smart move on your part.
So what strategies do you use to engage and connect with your audience?
I think that's really important. So I remember I was at Sunstone, and dude, like almost everybody there knew who I was. It was crazy. I was like even people, the way people would look at me, I could tell like they knew who I was, and that was pretty crazy. But I was talking to some people in the hallway, and these people were like, what's the best part about doing what you're doing? And I said, you know what it is? It's this right here, right now, having this conversation with you.
I remember at MHA, I saw an event that was happening. Some speaker was talking, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go in. And then I saw you were sitting there, and so I thought, hey, I have to go in and watch this presentation now because Steve is sitting there, and he has an empty seat. So I sat down next to you, and then you had to take a call, and so I watched your stuff. I rifled through your wallet to see if you had any money, and there's nothing there. But anyhow, so it was, and then right after that, you let me film your book giveaway. So that was.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So because I recognize you,
yeah,
we are now best friends.
Exactly. Well, how could I not recognize you with wearing those tie-dye shirts all the time?
Right. Tie-dye was that's why I got some tie-dye wall hangings too. So how do you handle feedback or criticism from listeners?
Generally the feedback's overwhelmingly positive from across the board. Occasionally I'll get a hater. Many of them I've turned that after because they didn't get what I was doing, because like you'd have the haters who say, oh, all those evangelicals are a-holes, right? And then they was like, oh, he's not like most evangelicals. And then you'd have all the people like, oh, the atheists, oh, so either you have atheists or you'd have Mormons that be very suspicious of an evangelical. Understandably so. Get it. Completely get it. But often once they got it, and now they understand who I am, and that I don't have an agenda of try to proselytize people, I find that it's very positive. And so I do hear the feedback. I do have a few people that are very critical of me, occasionally, but I also feel like in many cases, I feel there's a sense of a tinge of jealousy that I sense from these people. I get this feeling like, I think this person is a failed podcaster. Somebody thought they're going to have a podcast, and then they see me come out of nowhere, or maybe they have this small podcast they've been working on for years, and they're not getting any traction. I come and just, kind of just outperform, what they're doing. So I really do feel like some of the criticism directed towards me is from frustrated former podcasters.
We'll see. If I start criticizing you in a few months, it's because my channel's going downhill.
Okay, yeah, let's say, hey, whatever you got to do. If you got to throw arrows at me, you got to tap get some clicks. I get it.
Sometimes there's a fine line between preconceived notions and prejudice.
Yes.
You were talking earlier about how people view the different types of people that have different viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
What's the biggest challenge you've had as a podcast host, and how have you overcome it?
I have to say, for me, this has been really, really easy. It's come really easy to me. The easy part was hitting record and starting the interview. It's like, it's all the stuff up to that, booking the people, doing the research, reading the book of the authors, that kind of stuff, but the nice thing about it is that in many cases I've already read their books. Maybe 15 years ago that I read their book, but when I would have like Richard Bushman on, or somebody whose book I read 15 years ago, I'd always be like, well, the questions I'm going to ask them are going to be about the things I still remember from the book 15 years later, because those things stuck out for me. So that's kind of the approach that I would take. Now, if it's a new author, and I tell people, the best way to read a book is you schedule an interview with the author. That gives you a real deadline. And so the challenge, I guess, is reading the books. I don't have the time to read the books that I used to have, right? I used to just consume these things like crazy. So I do. That's definitely the challenge is just trying to get the books read, to do right by the author. I try to have the book completely read. I can't, or I'll even go to the author and say, okay, if I can't read the whole book, what chapters do I definitely need to read, before we do the interview.
Are there any specific goals or milestones you hope to achieve with your podcast in the future?
So I hit the
What's the next?
5,000 subscriber benchmark, and I hit 500,000 views just recently. Okay, and that to me, those were important milestones. I feel like you hit 5,000 subscribers and you get 500,000 views. You're an established player, especially in this realm, right? Where the big dog is, Mormon Stories, and he's got like 150,000 subscribers, right? So you can kind of scale it, like John Dehlin is what, 10, let's see, maybe 40 times bigger than me. I don't know, I whatever it is, 30, 40 times. Well, anybody launches a podcast and Joe Rogan's only 30 to 40 times bigger than them, that's a pretty big important thing. So I kind of just scale it that way, like compare it from that, who's the big dog, how many subscribers does he have? And so I think for me, the next big milestones are going to be 10,000 subscribers and 1,000,000 views. I think that's like that puts you at another level. And then after that, look, I look at it this way. I tell people, God told me don't make any plans. So I don't really set goals. I just kind of look at, like, I'll reach in like, oh yeah, 5,000 subscribers, that'd be cool. 500,000 views, that's kind of cool. So I just kind of acknowledge these milestones as they come along.
What do you think will come first, the 1 million views or the 10,000 subscribers?
1 million views will happen first. Yeah, because I'm at over 5,300 subscribers now, and I just crossed 600,000 subscribers. So it seems to be the million views I'll probably hit that
Christmas?
Yeah, you never know. Yeah, it's entirely plausible I could hit it by the end of the year. Yeah, sure.
That'd be a good Christmas gift.
It would be. Yep.
And who was your biggest get so far?
Well, I think one of the most important gets was having 106 subscribers at the Mormon History Association and approaching Richard and Claudia Bushman. And within 5 to 10 minutes of me introducing myself to him, he agreed to come on my program. And I will tell you, podcasters, Rick Bennett was there, and he's like, Steve, I've invited him many times to come on my program. He's turned me down. It's like, how in the world did you manage that? So I knew that, and then the day after I taped my interview with Richard Bushman, I'm on the phone for the first time with John Dehlin. Like, how in the world, how did you book Richard Bushman?
So the key to getting on John Dehlin show is to get Richard Bushman. I got to write that down. I think I found you because I was looking for Richard Bushman appearances.
Okay.
And then I saw that you had, so I think I was like your 273rd subscriber. And he had already been on, it was probably a couple months after he had been on.
Yeah.
And that's when I started becoming more.
I'll have you know that I've been in touch with Richard Bushman, and he will be coming back on my program. I'm going to do 2 episodes with him. I'm going to do one where we talk about the new book, about the plates. And then I'm going to have both Richard and Claudia Bushman to come on to talk about their legacies in the Mormon scholarship world.
Well, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I figured they're both in their 90s. This interview needs to happen.
Right. So let's see. So what are some of your favorite podcasts? And, they could be Mormon podcasts. They could be religious. They could be philosophy.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, good. Thanks for asking me that. So like overall, like I listened back in the day, especially as an atheist, I watched a lot of Myth Vision with Derek Lambert. Matt Delahante's Atheist Experience. They still have the live Sunday call-in program, and I'd often watch that live on Sundays. And so I spent a lot of time watching a lot of atheists and Christian debates and stuff like that. And I watch Christian stuff too. And let's see, there's Apologia. He was a former Mennonite who then is an atheist. And then there's Genetically Modified Skeptic, another evangelical who's an atheist. Who's really good, young man. And then there's the clearly stated casually or stated clearly guy, John Perry, who I used to watch his series and end up booking him as a guest on my program because he did a lot of stuff about visiting the Creation Museum, and he did a series on the Creation Museum, visiting that in Kentucky.
That in Kentucky?
Yep, that's in Kentucky. Yep. And so those are so, and I could probably name a bunch more that I've watched, but those would be a lot of the atheist ones I spent a lot of time. And of course, Aaron Ra, who I would later have on my program. I watched Aaron Ra's takedowns of the charlatan creationist Kent Hovind, based in Alabama, originally from Pensacola, Florida. So then I, of course, would watch Gospel Tangents. I'd watch Mormon Stories. I watched Steve Waldron, who's got this, he's a Oneness Pentecostal in Albany, Georgia, and he has this channel where he does book reviews. And so and then I saw this guy, and it's literally low rent. He just sits in front of his camera, his wife turns it on, and he just starts talking about some book that he just bought at the store, I didn't even read. Guy had like 3 million views. So I knew, okay, that guy can do it. I know I can. And then the only podcast I actually ever listened to was Radio Free Mormon. I would stay up in northern Florida for many years and take care of a property that I would up there. And every night I'd have dinner, and I would just go to say, okay, not Amazon. Okay, what's Amazon? Yeah, the thing we say, Alexa, please play Radio Free Mormon. And then I would eat dinner.
And what year was that about?
This would have been circa 2000, 18, 19, 20, somewhere there.
Okay, so way before COVID.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, it was during COVID that I actually started picking up podcasting as trying to find out who's out there and what's available. And so I had to binge on a lot of prior episodes. Well, thank you very much, Steve, for sharing your thoughts on podcasting.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to get more podcasters on our show. If anybody has a show in mind, or if you're a podcaster, please look for our contact information in the description. And everybody hit the like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.